Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. All right, time to bring back the very popular John Middlekauff podcast, 3 and Out, former NFL scout. Before he joins us, download the Game Time app. You know the drill, takes about 90 seconds. Lowest prices guaranteed on last-minute tickets. You download the Game Time app. You put in the code Colin, C-O-L-I-N. You get up to $20 off your first purchase. It makes playoff tickets, NBA, baseball, concerts, you get them even faster, even closer to the act. They've got zone deals. You pick the section. Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. You just take the guesswork. Sometimes when you go to games, it's last minute, it's 3 hours before, and it's a concert, it's a show, it's a comedy event, playoff basketball. We got an NBA Finals. You're going to want to go to some of these games. Download the Game Time app. Put in the code Colin. That's the redeem code. Get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, always guaranteed. All right. Former NFL scout John Middlekauff. A buddy of mine called me today, asked how I was doing. I said I had a podcast with John Middlekauff. He said, that guy works, man. That guy is constantly working. And I said, well, I haven't talked to him in a month, so now's a good time. You know, I had Denny Parkins on, a real talented kid from Chicago, and I said, I think that Bears are going to be really good. I think the division offensively is a really good division with really good coaching and really good O-lines. I said, the only thing that'll screw it up is a distraction, and then they get hard knocks. I thought, oh, God. All these couples that have cameras in their houses, they all get divorced. You know, it's the end of times. I guess in the league, nobody wants it. How are people now used to it? Your sources, are they used to it kind of now?
I said this on the podcast last week. Forever, right? You know, especially when the series started, it was pretty intrusive. Humans weren't used to being followed around by cameras in 2002, right? Now everywhere you go, someone has a camera phone out talking to themselves. I actually think these guys are pretty numb to it. Think how long Caleb Williams has been used to cameras pointed at him. Press conferences, the way his life is, podcasts, you name it. I think it's less intrusive now than ever because of how numb these guys are to cameras. Now, I think some of the hoopla around it is not ideal. But let's face it, Colin, the authenticity of the mid-2000s, you remember when you would have the inside of the coaches and GMs talking about cutting players and this guy sucks, and we don't get that anymore. So that got thrown out. Really, I've said Hard Knocks isn't for me anymore. It just really isn't.
Right.
I think it's a pretty watered down version, but I get it. It's popular, but I don't think it phases the player specifically. Maybe the coaches, it can be a little unnerving having a camera look at you, knowing that, but you get to control what comes out, right? The teams have final cut. It's like state-run media. So I don't think it's a big deal at all anymore.
I think there's two stories in the NFL that are real obvious ones. One of them being, Matt Eberflus, and the downside to even if you have a good defensive coach, they generally don't have as good a connections to offensive coordinators as a McVay, as a Shanahan, and Andy Reid, Sean Payton. Those guys are pretty dialed in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you do hit on a really good offensive coordinator and he's good, Ben Johnson's an outlier. They take gigs and leave in 2 years, and then you have to hit another one. Sean McDermott hit on Brian Daboll. He didn't have success with the next hires, and that's very common among defensive coaches. I mean, Mike Tomlin's hit on some, missed on some badly. Pete Carroll, same thing. So I when I look at Eberflus, I don't think he's a bad coach. I always say if you can show me that your side of the ball. Well, the Bears defense in the last 7-8 weeks was really good. They have a good corner, Montez Sweat, but they don't have great personnel up front. So I'm interested. I think Eberflus changed his look.
He got a stylist, colored his hair.
he Yeah, he understands it's a big city, a lot of people watching. I don't want to look like a frumpy old defensive coach. If you had to wager, he gets through the year. Kind of where do you land on
Yeah, I'm
Eberflus?
not as confident as some that they're going to make the playoffs. I think they could be good and win 8, 9 games and miss. I mean, their division's a mother. I mean, Detroit's bringing everyone back,
Yeah.
including the coaches. I think everyone, you'd be crazy to not be high on Green Bay if that quarterback continues to play like this. Their new defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley. So to me, if they miss the playoffs, you could argue it's unfair. Eberflus should get 2 years to kind of show what he can do with this young team, but that's not the way it's going to work, right? If they go if they go, what would it be, 8-9 or 9-8 and miss, I could just see because the pressure and the hype on this team. But I'm not as confident they're going to be a playoff team, and a big reason is because their division. Hell, if Minnesota is the worst team in your division, I mean that's not an easy team to play, right? So they got an excellent coach, they got a lot of firepower. And I understand the pushback would be, well, the Bears could have easily beat the Detroit Lions multiple times last year. I'm not saying they're bad. It's just, I think the hype on the quarterback, big picture, totally behind it. He can be a high end player. Most guys don't come into the league and look like CJ Stroud, right? I mean, it's usually there are some growing pains, especially because the transition that he's going to have the way he played last year in college is not going to translate. They're not going to have him do that in theory. So, and if he gets some of those kind of hero ball habits, you're playing NFL players. You're not playing Arizona anymore, and they were struggling to beat Arizona last year. Now the Bears' defense is better offensively. They have
Yeah.
firepower, but like you said, I think the pressure on this coach. You don't make the playoffs, you could have a really successful year, right? And you could still get fired.
Yeah, I think one, even the good quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, threw a lot of picks early. That's the reality of it. I think the second thing, the one thing that I think Caleb gets a break, there's not really a great pass rush in that division. In fact, the Bears at times didn't have a great one, but Montez Sweat is great. Packers have been looking for a great pass rush for a
Yeah.
decade. Minnesota upgraded on some B guys, not A guys. Detroit, Hutchison's excellent, about 11 sacks last year, but their corners are weak. There's not a dominating defense in this division. It's offensive coaches, so I do think he's going to come in. I mean, if you head to the AFC North and you're getting Myles Garrett and the Ravens culture, that's a whole different ball game. I've said this. Justin Fields won 7. My guess is Chicago wins 8, but looks
That's what
significantly
I'm
better.
saying. And there's a chance he could have a really good rookie season and be the third best
Yeah.
quarterback in his own division. If Jared Goff replicates what he's been doing the last couple of years, he's going to be a Pro Bowl level guy. Jordan Love, there's a question mark there. We have an 8-game sample size of high level. But if he carries that over, there's a decent chance Caleb Williams could throw 24 touchdowns and 12 picks. We all view him like a
Yep.
transcendent or the trajectory's pointing high and go, he was the third best quarterback in his division, and they're the third place team in the division. They missed the playoffs because there's not unlimited amount of spots, right? The Niners, the Rams, the Lions, the Packers. You start doing the math. Atlanta should be better. The Saints were 9-8 last year, and they had a terrible offense. Now they bring Kubiak's kid. The Eagles are going to be good. I mean, the Cowboys, even if they take a step back from 12, they'll be in that 8-9 range. So it's just difficult.
Yeah. Well, if sports fans don't like to be wrong, and there's a lot of people who are proven wrong on Justin Fields, so just get ready for it. You have to watch things. You can't your life can't be just about the result. You have to contextualize everything. I don't think there's any question Caleb Williams is several notches better than Justin Fields, like several notches better. I mean, if you read the writing on the wall, and we both have enough sources, I mean, Caleb's not going to have problems finding open receivers. That was a real issue for Justin. There was like Zach Wilson, there were guys all over the field open. He just couldn't find them. So people are going to want to be right, the Justin Fields fans. But I think the league spoke when he went for a 6th-round pick. And I think very quickly you're going to see that Caleb's just different.
For sure. And to me, the offensive weaponry that they have for him, we've talked about this before. It's a pretty easy landing zone for a young quarterback with that many wide receivers.
Here's a second thing, and I'm always trying to be somewhat delicate with Aaron Rodgers because I'm viewed as anti-Aaron, but last year, 60 quarterbacks played in the league. And if I just said to you, forget the teams and the names, 40-year-old quarterback, off an Achilles surgery with a makeshift old and really young offensive line in a better conference. Does that scream the quarterback plays 17 games? I think lost in this Jets improvement, and people love their roster, is, hey, they're a Breece Hall injury from being a have to pass offense, have to pass. And now the good news, they shouldn't be in shootouts. Aaron shouldn't be forced to throw 44 times a game, but they got one back. And I tend to believe that championship teams are built when you have your 7 to 8 best players all in their prime. Like Detroit right now, Jared's in his prime. Hutchinson moved into it. That running back may be into it now. Amon St. Brown, Penei Sewell.
Laporta.
You're getting a lot of it. Now, they're all like moving into their prime. And you start looking at Green Bay, and it's like, I guess Breece probably is. Garrett Wilson's still raw. A lot of their defensive talent, Sauce Gardner's probably moving into it. But they got a lot of guys that aren't there or were never there. PFF last week had the Kansas City roster number 2, and I was like, they're bad at tackling, don't have a number 1 receiver. It's not the second best roster in the league. I look at the Jets and I just keep saying, if you gave me over under 15 games on Aaron, I'd bet the under.
Did you see
I'd
the
be
clip
like
last week of him scrambling to his right and kind of limping?
Yeah.
And whether you tell me it's blister prevention or whatever, that has to be pretty concerning. Because I will say this, last year at this time, and remember, he dealt with a calf a little in OTAs. But when you saw him move around and he was healthy, he looked somewhat spry. He's 40 years old. And we have, I would say, pretty recent data of some legendary guys falling off a cliff for all different.
Matt Ryan.
And I would put him on the lower end of these players. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger. Most of my life when I was a kid in the 90s, guys got to like 35 in all pro sports and were done. And then Brady kind of changed it. LeBron kind of changed it. Most people fall off a cliff. And that's what I'm kind of...
Russell Wilson.
Yeah. And that's crazy, but he's not quite as quick anymore. He's not quite the athlete. Why? He's 34. He's not 26. Aaron's 40. 40. And part of the reason he's older, right? Because played several years in college, red-shirted, gray-shirted in the pros, didn't play for a while. So he's actually older, even though he hasn't been playing technically as long as some of those guys like Peyton Manning when he was 40. But I think there's a very good chance if you just base it off the history of sports, it usually ends poorly. You usually don't do John Elway, this one's for John, especially with the Jets, right? I mean, their offensive coordinator's not any good. He's just not. I mean, most teams in the league laugh at that situation. And he's there for one reason and one reason only, which I'm for the coach and the quarterback having a good relationship. That's how you and your producers have good it should be healthy if the guy is good at his job. Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady made a lot of sense. Kyle Shanahan and his quarterbacks, Rashawn McVay and Matt Stafford. This guy's just not viewed as good enough. And last year when Aaron left, it was an abomination. And these stories, because of the organization, what if they start slow? Now, I actually think they have an opportunity. I don't think their schedule is that hard early after the Niner game, but
it's a weird schedule. It's a lot of night games and short weeks.
They're just going to be covered like the Lakers or the Yankees, and we know things get weird with that franchise. And even if it's all about football, none of the other extracurricular stuff, if it's weird on offense, they're just going to point at the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. And then the head coach is going to be up there like saying who knows what. It could snowball into weirdness really quick. And like Aaron said, if I don't perform, we're all getting fired. I mean, that's what's on the line here.
Yeah, I think the schedule, I think it's viewed as easy. And we have to be honest, 7 teams that made the playoffs won't. 7 new ones will. You got to be careful about looking at last year. To me, the Colts and Washington could be. I mean, the Colts won 9 games with Gardner Minshew. I mean, Anthony Richardson, when he was playing, was jaw-dropping.
They were a drop pass
11
from winning that division last year.
Yep. And Washington, I contend they're going to be probably the most improved NFC team. So you start looking at these teams. I did something the other day where since the league expanded to 14 playoff teams, 6.8 or 7 new teams make it every year. And I went through a list of teams. Some are obvious. Atlanta, big quarterback upgrade. Chargers, big coaching upgrade. Cincinnati, Burrow plays. I think Colts are really interesting. They're my surprise team potentially in the league. If I said to you, and I think the Jets have to, if Aaron's healthy, have to be considered. I thought last week was really interesting. So Miami signs Jalen Waddle to a massive deal, with Tyreek Hill already signing a stupendous contract. Okay, what are we saying here? So if Tua just signs the 10th biggest contract, that's Josh Allen now, who will get an extension or raise. They're $105 million $105 million bucks, I think, something close to that, on 3 dudes, all on offense. Not a pass rusher, not a corner, not an interior defensive lineman, not an offensive tackle, 2 receivers and a quarterback. So I almost wondered.
3 small guys too.
Was Miami saying, listen, we're making our bet. We're just not going to have, this is our way of telling you, you're not getting $55 million. We're just not going to give you that. Because I don't know. I know Dak has a market. I've talked to 2 GMs.
The Raiders would sign him
who
yesterday.
have told me yesterday. And I think very quickly, if the Drake May thing looks awful, they'd sniff at it. I mean, New Orleans with Derek Carr, I don't think they're in luck. Giants, Daniel Jones. What is Tua's market?
I don't think it would be that good. But he's not my type player. But we also know when you hit free agency at that position, people overspend. But who is giving Tua $150 million on the open market? Who is? I can't see. Did you see the picture of him at the charity event? He looked like he was on Ozempic. He looks tiny. He looks really, really skinny. I'm not into small guys who aren't great athletes with average arms. Just not really my style. I mean, I like my quarterbacks to be a little bigger, a little more mobile with howitzers. Because when you look at Tua, in theory, he should be this kind of mobile little guy, but he is much closer to Jared Goff the way he plays. I've said it over and over. Here's what Dak has proven now. He's given me 3 straight years of 12 wins. Do I want to give him $50+ million? I do not. Is there an opportunity that if he gets hot one postseason, they could win a couple games like an Eli Manning situation 100%? I don't believe Tua has that capability. What we witnessed last year, I mean, if this was like the Indy 500, they were up like several laps. The Bills were leaking oil. They were 6-6. Then the season ends. They win the division, and they're hosting playoff games, and Miami has to go on the road. And even when I saw Veach at the Combine, he's like, I've been in the NFL a long time. That was the coldest game I've ever stood on the field for when he played the Chiefs. And we felt pretty good about our chances because we knew that offense couldn't function in the freezing cold. But they wouldn't have had a chance in a cold weather game against Baltimore, against any of these teams. So part of it is the AFC. If you spend all this money on Tua, because at the end of the day, could Dak, it hasn't gone well these last 3 years, but beat a Purdy, beat a Jared Goff if he plays right. How is Tua ever going to outplay Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Herbert now with Harbaugh, Josh Allen? It's not happening. It doesn't mean he's not a solid NFL starter, but once you start talking about the money, this is not baseball. You don't have an unlimited amount of cap space. Tyreek Hill, he's one of the greatest players I've ever seen. No problem investing. Jalen Waddle, you draft him high. He's a productive player. I get it. Tua, why can't we just play this out? Why does every quarterback have to get in it? Jared Goff proved last year. He went toe-to-toe with Matt Stafford in the playoff game. He won the second playoff game against Baker Mayfield. He was great against the 49ers. They have tangible evidence now in the playoffs, let alone the regular season now for a year and a half. Where's that evidence against Tua? He plays well in October. Well, you're in the AFC where most of these teams come November and December. I looked at their schedule whenever the schedules came out. They had 3 or 4 games post, Halloween. They get a little cold, Colin. Get a little cold. What if you can't do it this year? If you can't win the division and host a playoff game, which they would have to do to have success in the playoffs because of their climate, what's the point of extending them? Just to say you have a quarterback?
Well, and last year, I've said this. Last year in the AFC, it was the year. Aaron gets hurt. Bills start slowly. Burrow gets hurt. Deshaun and Cleveland are a head-scratching mess. Anthony Richardson hurt. C.J. Stroud's only
Brandon
a rookie.
Staley with the Chargers.
Trevor Lawrence. And Trevor Lawrence injured every part of his lower torso,
Yeah.
like in the last 8 weeks. It was the year, and they didn't do it. So Aaron's back. Jets have another draft. Buffalo's not starting 6-6. Let me speaking of Buffalo, I'm going to throw a theory at you that and this is especially true with younger quarterbacks, 4 years and in, is that I've said this. Something can be really important in your life, but overrated. A big house. A house is nice. A bigger house is not necessarily bigger mortgage, more cleaning, bigger yard. Like, my wife and I talk about this. Like location so much more important than size of house. Like, we'll just give us the good location. We'll add a bedroom. We'll figure out and make, create another
Use
place
the
to go to the
same three
bathroom.
rooms every day. There's a lot of rooms you don't even
That's
touch.
right. So I used to call wide receivers icing on the cake, never the cake. The cake was the left tackle, the pass rusher, the quarterback, the head coach. And then I had to, about 6-7 years ago, acknowledge the rules have changed. They're part of the cake. But I don't necessarily love dominant number one receivers. Patriots with Randy Moss was a great example where you almost felt like you had to throw to him. And I don't think losing Stefon Diggs, if the kid out of Florida State can play, they have two excellent tight ends. They finally found a running back. Josh is in his athletic prime. I think we're in a little bit of a wide receiver bubble. $30 million for a receiver. If you don't have the quarterback, we've always said quarterbacks make the receiver. Even Larry Fitzgerald had off years without great quarterbacks. Carson Palmer, big year. Kurt Warner, big year. So I look at Buffalo and I think there's this feeling that, watch out. It's a free fall. I don't feel like it. I really don't.
I think they're going to be really good. I mean, it's part of my Tua, where I land on that situation is like, I don't think you're any closer to catching them. And it starts with Josh Allen. When's the last time he had a wide receiver like the guy they just drafted from Florida State? A big body, high point guy. He's a basketball player. So Stefon Diggs, one, like a lot of wide receivers, their personality can change on a daily basis. And it was clearly driving him nuts. And then the play was started to, like a lot of older players, he's played at a high level, was no longer at the same level. So it was probably a pretty easy move for them to make. And then they get the wide receiver one that is just going to translate to cold weather, right? He's not predicated on speed. So I'm with you. I mean, they've won this division 4 straight years. They're the new Patriots in the division in terms of the dominance, obviously not the same playoff success. The other thing is when you have an all-time great quarterback, I mean, that's what I think Josh Allen is going to go down as one of the great quarterbacks of my life.
Same.
They make wide receivers. Ideally, you would love to have Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne. Like Peyton benefited. He was a great player, and they also did a great job because Bill Polian is an all-time great exec. Tom Brady won a lot of games with Julian Edelman's and Danny Amendolas. So if you can find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle, you don't need to have – look at the Packers. I love Devontae Adams. I'd want him on my team every day of the week. But they get rid of him. He goes to the Raiders. They haven't won at all. He's still a great player, but now he's kind of useless because their quarterback situation sucks. And the Packers, boom, last year, kicked the shit out of the Cowboys in a playoff game. And it looks like all we talk about is they have one of the best young wide receiver rooms in the league. So I think when I saw the story about would they trade Justin Jefferson, right, the Minnesota Vikings. Well, if I get 2 1s and 2 2s, and allocate my resources differently, it'd be a no-brainer than paying him. And we all acknowledge one of the great non-quarterbacks in the NFL. But it's a pretty easy math equation, especially I already got Jordan Addison. I got an offensive coach. Like, yeah, I wouldn't just trade him for a second-round pick. But if you're going to give me 3 1s, here, take them. You give him the contract. But I think there's a reason a lot of smart teams now go, that's not worth it to us, giving up all these ones and then having to allocate the resources. So we've kind of seen less and less of those massive trades since the Devontae and the Tyreek, because why don't I just draft a guy in the 20s like the Baltimore Ravens last year? I get Zay Flowers, and he's on a cost-controlled contract that pays him $3 or $4 million a year, right? And I get to keep my assets.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you look at the greatest example is Kansas City that took a touchdown machine in Tyreek Hill, and they've won back-to-back Super Bowls without him. And Miami's going no further with him. And, the other thing you have to acknowledge is football is different in December and January. You just don't throw the ball as deep as often. You just don't.
You don't throw the ball deep that
You know,
often in general. Like there aren't go routes every other series. That's not the way football, even though it
right.
kind of feels that way. A lot of explosive plays nowadays, right, happen around the line of scrimmage because you have so many guys with so much speed. Debo Samuel's had a ton of explosive plays over the years. I would imagine the majority of them have come 10 yards and in from where the ball is snapped.
Yeah. The I was the Pittsburgh Steelers are at a really interesting crossroads. So Mike Tomlin can get a little prickly when his future is discussed, but he has not beaten an elite quarterback in a playoff game in
He hasn't won a
forever.
playoff
And
game
that's
in
just the
almost a
reality.
decade.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting. They're not paying anything for Russell. Russell, any chance he gets to say, boy, I'd love to see packages for Justin Fields at wide receiver.
That's kind
It's
of
like,
weird.
I mean, that's so transparent. They're all talking about, and Justin doesn't want any part of that, and he shouldn't want any part of it. But I did have somebody that I trust, kind of that reports on the Steelers, say Russell to Pittsburgh is going to be. That culture there is very grinder oriented. Even your stars. Big Ben was kind of a small town guy. TJ Watt, Midwestern guy. The Le'Veon Bells come in and very quickly they kind of feel disconnected from it. It's a grinder operation. And I'm not saying Russell doesn't grind and work hard, but he's got a brand. He's just different. I mean, call it what you want. Nobody gets called out in this league as much as Russell. And somebody that has good connective tissue to the Steelers said there's already been a couple situations where, he's Russ and these are the Steelers. And I say this, Green Bay and Pittsburgh have a very lunch pail quality. Now, the Steelers usually have elite defensive personnel. Packers are better on the offensive side in terms of efficiency. Packers have also had offensive coaches. But if you had to do crystal ball on Russell Wilson, what it looks like, end of the year schedule's awful. But if you had to have a crystal ball on Russell Wilson, another quarterback who almost inexplicably got worse fast without an injury, just got worse fast, nearing 35. What is your crystal ball?
If I had to go
Pittsburgh?
over under on Justin Fields' first start with the Steelers, it'd probably be around 5.5. I think he's in, and I think he's in early. The other thing is, Russell has to ingratiate himself. When you think of Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, I think TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick, I mean, those guys and Mike are kind of on the same page, right? I mean, they feel like part of the operation. Do they feel like Russell Wilson guys? I mean, when you think TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick, you never say the word brand. You think ass kickers and football players. And I just can't imagine. I just don't think he's good enough. And the margin for error in this conference, dinking and dunking, you could argue if it starts slow. Like, what if they're 0-2? And it's just like, what are we doing on it? Might not even get to 5.5. Because where's his equity with the operation? Denver was pretty heavily.
They're not paying him
anything. They're paying him less than $1 million. Honestly, if it got really, you could cut him and you wouldn't even think twice. And that happens to a lot of NFL players. Once you start getting to team 3 and 4, your equity with the operation disappears. And it's a performance-based business. So no one's going to want to hear about anything except touchdown passes. And I don't know. I mean, the guy we've seen the last couple of years, I don't know if his confidence is gone. I don't know but he's been a pretty marginal player now for 3 straight years, because that last year in Seattle and then everything that happened the last 2 years in Denver. I also think if the fan bases in the NFL sneaky have a lot of juice, because that's kind of where the owners, they listen to radio, they read. So you think Pittsburgh, if all of a sudden, listen, I don't know. I would bet Justin Fields, he's probably closer to what we've seen his whole career. But we've also seen guys improve with that skill set when they get with the right coordinator. Arthur Smith resurrected Ryan Tannehill. If I'm a fan and we're 0-2, like, I'm not watching Russell Wilson. Well, I've seen this from afar. Put in the young kid and let's just see if we can figure something out with this guy that has a lot of physical tools. Now, quarterback's a lot more than running fast and throwing hard. His pocket presence has been a major question mark. But what did Arthur Smith do with Ryan Tannehill? They ran the ball. He gave him a lot of easy looks. Kept it pretty simple. Now, I don't think they really have Derrick Henry. Najee Harris, okay back. Jalen Warren, pretty explosive. But if their defense is good, Honestly, if I was a Steeler
You
fan,
know,
I just want to see Justin Fields right out. I wouldn't even want to see Russell Wilson. I just like, can we resurrect this guy?
the NBA playoffs are heating up. Man, they have been so good. I know it's over, but Lakers Nuggets may have been a 5-game series. It was great. Knicks, Sixers, amazing. Why don't you sign up for the DraftKings Sportsbook app? It takes 90 seconds, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're in DraftKings, once you sign up, you got to check this out. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Great proposition, right? $5, you get $150. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. The code's Colin, C-O-L-I-N. It's me, C-O-L-I-N. Really quick, really easy. If you've never bet sports before, check it out. Really makes the games fun. The code is Colin. New customers get $150 in bonus bets by betting 5 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Well, it's interesting because Arthur Smith, his history is a lot of throws over the middle of the field, and that's not what Russell
No, he throws
does.
deep go
That's
routes.
just not
That's
it.
his favorite throw.
Yeah, because, his size, he can struggle. Kyler Murray admits this. Tua acknowledges this. Sometimes I struggle to see over the line. So I've been doing this now 30 years of talking sports. And, I do a segment every Monday, Colin right, Colin wrong. I have big opinions, miss all the time. Russell, I don't ever remember a player in my life at that position that I was sure he was great. And then after a year, I'm pretty sure he's just B minus. And there's no injury. He's not to 36. He works really hard. Like it's a really hard ask. You start trying to figure out, you say, well, he didn't get along. Well, Seattle, he wasn't beloved. So no injury. He's still elusive. It's like he put weight on in the wrong spot. He got a little thick. I find Russell to be a complete historic outlier. Like Matt Ryan never moved well, didn't have a big arm, kind of thin, and it felt like the game quickly passed him by. It got very mobile and athletic, and he wasn't. There are players at the end. Phillip Rivers was never athletic. He got like the most unathletic quarterback in the league. Eli Manning just felt like he was out of gas. Russell, you're like, last year in Seattle, he's a wizard, and then he's bad, and then Peyton makes him okay. And I'm like, I don't think he sees the field. I don't think he sees guys. And I from people close and around Sean, like that's what the film said. He just didn't see open guys.
I'll give you another guy that falls under that category. Now he had a bunch of off the field stuff, but Deshaun Watson was much more of kind of a scramble to throw ad lib guy. And when it was on, it looked spectacular. But over the course of years, you have to play from within the pocket. Now he missed time because the massage therapist, he's been injured, but he has looked like a shell of himself in Cleveland. And it's not like he's throwing to me and you. I mean, they have a lot of talent on the team, and he looks like a guy, and he's way younger than Russell. You're like, what the hell is this? And that is a bone of,
and we love his coach
for sure. I mean, we love his team. Joe Flacco gets in there, they start rattling off wins. I mean, they're loaded, and that's one I know a lot of people in the NFL are like, if you really watch them in Houston, it's a lot of kind of running outside the tackles and making stuff happen, which is awesome to watch when you're sitting on your couch. No one in my life watching football did that better than Russell in his prime. But like over and over and over, Peyton, Tom, Aaron, it's winning. Think about some of the solid Cousins. Why has he had success? Dak, Goff, win in the pocket is how you do it on a weekly basis. Especially nowadays, you watch the combine, how many of these D linemen are running 4.7s and 4.8s? So you start scrambling around. You don't get as much space anymore because these guys can run you down. The guy the Eagles drafted last year, Jalen Carter, is like 320 pounds and can run faster than some like running backs. So the athleticism, and let's face it, the other thing is the offensive linemen that have come into the league over the last 4 or 5 years, the supply and demand relative to the high defensive linemen, it hasn't been there. So the offensive linemen, a lot of these guys aren't as good as they used to be. And we know because of college football, is not quite the same the way that they coach with the spread offenses. And these defensive linemen are coming for you, and they can catch you unless you're Kyler Murray. And most, obviously, Russell definitely no longer is as fast. And even Deshaun Watson, you watch him, he doesn't play fast anymore.
Yeah. One of the things I want to shift to because the schedules came out last week, some college football schedules.
I had a
And
bone to pick with you. I wrote it down, so maybe we'll get into it right now.
okay, let's do it. So I said, as somebody that grew up with the Sonics, when the Sonics left Seattle, people said, Colin, you were outraged. And I'm like, listen, I went to Key Arena. There was no parking. It was dark. It sucked. It didn't drive revenue. What do you want me to say? Like, you got to, it's a banner. Downtown Seattle's always been kind of dark and gloomy. It's not a vibrant downtown. I'm like, I'm sorry. And when the Pac-12 imploded, I said, I've been telling my friends this for years. There's too much to do in the fall and like August 28th till October 18th. I'm sorry. The packed outside of Oregon and Washington, there's just empty stadiums. There's too much to do. We got pro sports in Seattle, Sanford, the Bay Area. Nobody talks
cares.
Stanford and Cal. And I'm like, it just doesn't work. I mean, you're giving the Pac-12's TV contracts giving USC 30 million. The Big Ten will give them 90. It's not hard. And the executives at Fox are guesstimating that the Big Ten ratings this year will go up 18%. That's big. In a lot of those games are on cable, 18%. And I said this, you start looking at some of these schedules, John, Jesus, I have spent, Sundays are work days for you and I. They're work days. We do a podcast on Sunday night. I'm around my TV. I go get a big workout in, sometimes go for a hike. By 10:05 Pacific, I'm ordering DoorDash. I'm there doing sit-ups occasionally for exercise. I'm watching TV for 8.5 hours.
It's not digging ditches, but it's a long day.
Yeah. Saturdays now. You start looking at the time zone. So whereas the SEC, there's only 2 time zones represented. You can have an Oregon game, then you can do an Iowa game, then you can do an East Coast game. I told my bosses, like, we've got to figure out a way to give somebody on our staff vacation time in the fall. Like, this is 7-day work week now. I cannot wait for college football. So I'm going to move into my controversial take of the week, which is, I always thought rivalries were big in college football, but what's going to happen now is the 12-team playoff is going to usurp everything. It's just going to become bigger than everything. And those storied rivalries just won't matter. Michigan, Ohio State will, Iron Bowl will, but most of them, the ratings for the college football playoff are going to be gigantic, and you're going to have to move off rivalries. Because what you don't want if you're USC, you're 6-1, you stun Oregon and Eugene. Instead of a bye before Ohio State, you're going to South Bend November 9th. And I'm like, you get knocked in the ass twice on those, and you're going to be like, yeah, I'm over the Notre Dame game. Now, Notre Dame needs it, but my take is, you guys may want to reconsider this in this conference.
Well, before we get into the elephant in the room on Lincoln Riley, I don't disagree. Let's use the Northwest. The Apple Cup and the Civil War, Oregon and Washington have always been a rivalry game, but those 2 games, Oregon State, Oregon, Washington State, Washington, were a bigger rivalry. Those are gone. No, they're Mountain West team. It doesn't matter anymore, and it won't with every passing year. And Oregon and Washington will probably grow in power and popularity that game.
Certainly in relevance.
I would say 2x every year. It'll get bigger and bigger. But the Notre Dame thing's separate, because eventually, are you in agreement that both these conferences, or I guess where football is going to end is like 2 conferences like the AFC and the NFC, Big Ten, SEC. So yes. Notre Dame, the regional, is going to end up in the Big Ten with USC, and they'll eventually play each other. So to me, that is separate from Lincoln Riley, who is going into his 3rd year. And I heard you talk about Notre Dame. I haven't heard you address this. Are you in agreement it's embarrassing for this story to come out? Because Brian Kelly, a lot like Lincoln Riley, both going into year 3, both losing their quarterback, both new defensive coordinators. I looked at LSU's schedule. They also play UCLA this year, and they add Oklahoma. They play Alabama every year. Ole Miss is a top 10 program. For Lincoln to beg to get out of that game. A couple weeks ago, I played golf, and I didn't know this, but on hole 4, one guy had a USC towel on his bag, and I started talking to one of the guys. He's like, he was in Reggie Bush's recruiting classes, was on that USC team for 5 years. So we start talking over the course of the round. And this guy was like a role player, played on these teams. And he brought up a point. If we would have in 05 would have practiced against that team, we would have hurt guys. and I said, USC getting out of this game. One of the reasons we all were so excited for Lincoln to come here, $120 million, bringing like USC back, right, to be a powerhouse. And then 2 years later, he's begging to get out of LSU. He's not playing in Baton Rouge. They're playing in Vegas. But I think we all know it's going to be a tough spot for him. But he can't say, oh, our schedule's harder. Well, so's theirs. And LSU, and this is where I respect Brian Kelly. Like, no, we're playing that game. I played Florida State the last 2 years. I got my ass kicked last year, remember, opening weekend. But like I watched the clip with you and Feldman. You could lose several games now. You could probably 9-3. There are going to be a couple 9-3 teams probably left out, and some teams.
Well, USC
agree it's a bad look though for Lincoln Riley to want out of that game. The Notre Dame thing's separate. What's his beat? Why doesn't he? He's in year 3, Colin. This isn't year 1. He's had 3 years to build this thing.
So let me defend. This is something I've talked about behind the scenes with coaches. So when you leave, what I would call sort of middle of the night leaving for a new job, like Saban at Michigan State, whoever wants to come, get on the plane, right? Like this happens in college football. Lane Kiffin, Tennessee to USC. So what you usually do is you go to your staff and you say, you call them late. You got a plane lined up. Guys, I'm going in 90 minutes. Meet at the airport. And you take whoever comes on the staff. I think deep down, Lincoln didn't think Alex Grinch was great and was disappointed with him. And Alex knew he was in trouble if there was a new coach. So Alex got on the plane. But when the guys get on the plane, you got to give them 2 years. You can't just say after 8 games, you're not it. So Lincoln felt this incredible loyalty to somebody I think he would have moved off of. And so Grinch probably thought, I don't have Lincoln to support me. I'm getting canned. I'm getting on that plane. And so I think this is the first year where Lincoln really, really thinks he has an elite staff. So that's first of all. They've been overcoming some of this staff stuff, loyalty to positions they don't really want to be loyal to. The second thing is Pete was in a different time. There was no NFL, much more tribal USC following. The market was different. You didn't have a conference championship game, semifinal games. If you won the Pac-12 and looked good, you're playing for a natty. It's hard. And I don't think Denver West, you have the defensive front 7 personnel of the South and Texas and Georgia. So I think between Alex Grinch and the reality is we got a lot of quarterbacks, receivers, corners out here, maybe an edge rusher. We don't have a lot of bigs. We just don't. I think it's been a tougher lift than Lincoln Riley on the defensive side than he realized it was good. I think he thought he would just outsmart and outscore everybody. He did that his first year. He did. If they beat Tulane they were leading late. If they beat Tulane, we look at year 1 and go, shit, they won 12 games with 2 NFL players. That's impressive. So then the second year, I don't think you would look at it the same. But that Tulane loss just was horrific. And so my takeaway is he doesn't want to say it publicly, but they feel like they're playing catch up defensively in this program.
And I'm not expecting Lincoln, especially at this point, to look like the 05 Trojans. Like
I think they'll win 8 games this year.
But they also 6 is on the table, right? If things get weird. Would you agree? but
I think if Miller Moss is as bad as he was in the spring game, 6 is on the table.
Brian Kelly has a new defensive coordinator too. He fired his guy because they were historically poor. And I'm with you on Pete, but I remember, and the internet and the world was not the same, obviously, in 04, 05, 06. Pete was going all over the country to recruit. And I just wonder, and I've said this for a while, I like Lincoln. I've met him a couple times. He came on this podcast a couple years ago. But I do think, I said this to you last year, and I just think big picture is something to watch. Like, small town Texas guy, this U.S. thing's kind of a different animal. Would Lincoln have more success, at the University of Texas or back at Oklahoma? Obviously, he's more suited that. This story comes out, all the people behind USC viewed him as like going to get back to the Pete days and be like, we're not scared of anybody. Kind of the way Kirby Smart acts or Jim Harbaugh acts. And obviously, I'm not saying all these programs play people, but once it's on the schedule, Brian Kelly's a good example. Like, he wasn't scared, and his schedule's not easy, but he knows he can go out west and recruit. So I just think that, I don't know, it's a pretty big red flag for me. And I understand that they're an underdog, right? They're a 6-point underdog. Like most people think they're going to get their ass kicked. But this is this is year 3. So it's now the game's different, NIL, the portal. But I'd say, shouldn't USC, you know better than me, have the money to just be going toe-to-toe with Texas and Ohio State, or do they not, NIL-wise?
No. Or Georgia, Texas, and Ohio State, and Oregon's 4th, have sort of separated mostly from the country on NIL. I think USC's collective is better now. UCLA's is terrible. It's a joke. Like they'll do fine in basketball where you need, I've been told, $4 million, you can win a national championship. Football, you may need 12. I think USC's closer to 7.5.
UCLA's in major trouble going to the Big Ten. Would you agree? Football-wise?
Here's what's funny. Yes. Now, the good news is they're going to fill the Rose Bowl a few times with your Wisconsins, Nebraskas, Iowas. They're the big winner in this, because Oregon, Washington don't need road fans. USC does a little. UCLA is desperate for them. So UCLA, it's a windfall economically from $30 million in an empty Rose Bowl annually to like $70 million and a full Rose Bowl 4 times. UCLA is going to pay some bills, but they're going to have to just live off high school players or grabbing these sort of like the best player on Yale or Toledo. And those guys, by the way, Wyoming, they're okay. They're not NFL guys, but they're okay. You can have 4 or 5 in your roster. I think the big winner in this, of all these schools, I think the big winner will be Oregon, because next to Ohio, except Ohio State, they can go toe-to-toe NIL with anybody, and I think Oregon will look big. Jed Fish will win at Washington. I don't think he's Kalen DeBoer, who I think is the best new coach I've seen in probably a decade, just in terms of top to bottom. I think he's
Look at his career record. He's like 120-10, coaching everywhere. I think Oregon's the big winner. I mean, is it fair to say, I mean, they have a legitimate chance to win the national championship this year, right? I mean, Ohio State's going to be tough. I mean, I think Ohio State, they spent like $15 million.
They play in Eugene.
Get them in Eugene. It's, Harbaugh leaving is a huge win for obviously the Pac-12 teams coming in, but also Ryan Day, because that was not going well. And Sharon Moore, impressive guy, but you don't lose Harbaugh and sustain the same thing.
Well, God, they
lost like 25 NFL players too.
And they were all like leaders. Yeah. And a lot of them were like 4th and 5th year linemen. I mean, they just leaned on the Buckeyes the last 3 years in the second half. Like, Michigan's not going to look the same. They're not going to look the same. And that's not a knock on Michigan, but you can't lose like 8 elite linemen who were sort of leaders in the clubhouse.
One thing that's going to change in college football, I know a bunch of my scouting buddies bitch and moan about all this, is like the COVID, that year that didn't count. So you had all these guys that were like 5th, 6th year guys that usually would be in the NFL. It's been a little out of whack, right? Washington, I mean, Michael Penix, and I like the player and I'm rooting for him, but he played in college football for about 17 years. So, I mean, those days are kind of, and we're just going to get back to the feel of Alabama, Ohio State having these 2nd and 3rd year guys being the core of their team. And then those guys will go to the end. I think, and this is the thing with the USC, that story coming out, it feels like Dan Lanning would not have done that. Now, Dan Lanning inherited with Mario recruiting a much better program. I'm not disputing that.
Much better players.
But it just does feel like the ethos of USC, fucking play you wherever. Parking lot, NFL team, who cares? It feels far, far removed, which was understandable when they were going through the turmoil of Clay Helton. But once you got Lincoln, it felt like we were kind of going to get our swag back, and it feels like there's still some insecurity there.
Listen, 2 Oregon State players will be 2 of their top 4 defensive players, a linebacker and a safety. They'll be 2 of their 4 to 5 best defensive players. Oregon State.
They've been good the last couple of years.
So that's
in fairness, but I hear.
No, yeah, Jonathan. Yeah. That's not the way it works. Usually, it's you're not going to take a Kentucky football player, 2 of them transfer to Georgia, and they're 2 of their best defensive players, and the other kid who may be their best defensive player is a UCLA defensive back. So it's they're playing catch up. I will say though, I've loved college football forever. I gave it a rest for about 7 years, I really peeled back my college football talk because I thought it got incredibly regional with Bama and Georgia. And I just thought, I'm not doing a show for the South. So I would say I used to be about a 25% college football show. Some years at ESPN, I was 30% during the football season. I peeled back to about 6%. I think I'll be closer to 15, 18%. I just think there's a ton of good stories. My guess on what USC becomes, and again, their 2025 recruiting class is actually their best. There's like big bodies. My guess is if Lincoln stays, they will not be Ohio State. They won't. But they'll be in the running with Penn State, Michigan, Oregon, and USC in that 10-win, could make it to a conference championship, but it will be Ohio State. When Harbaugh leaves, it will be Ohio State's conference going forward. That's my guess.
Agree. I mean, they're rosters. I mean, they spent like $13 million on 4 guys in the transfer portal. All of them reviewed as top 20 picks. You know, I mean, they got a guy from Alabama. I mean, they could be really, really good. Now, I'm not the biggest Chip Kelly guy. We'll see on that one. I don't know. I think the offense, but defensively, they've been a lot better. And Ryan Day's an offensive guy, and they have so much talent on offense. But the Harbaugh move really might have saved Ryan Day because his record is remarkable. But you know the way that operation, you can't lose to Michigan 4 years. They got their butt kicked again. People would start asking questions because there's not a program in the country, and this would include Georgia, that is spending more money, right, on the coaching staff and on the players than Ohio State. Like they are spending the money. They're like the George Steinbrenner Yankees right now.
I've argued their biggest dilemma was that they recruit at now such a high level at receiver that they lost their identity offensively. As they were so good at receiver that at practice, they passed more. You had to get the ball out in the flat. You got 5-star guys. And I think Michigan last year had one receiver I liked, but they weren't a great perimeter team offensively. They were great. And what they did the last 3 years is they became Ohio State. They just pounded you. And Ohio State had so much perimeter talent. It's impossible as a coach. Ryan Day and offenses at practice, looking at Harrison, looking at these guys and thinking, I got NFL corners and they can't cover these guys. I know Purdue can't. And so they kind of became, to me, a little bit of a finesse version of Ohio State, which played into Harbaugh's hands where he loves physicality. That's why Stanford started pushing around USC at the end. They became almost old USC where they just ran the ball. Even Andrew Luck was a physical component at quarterback. So I think my take with Ohio State, their issue has simply been they're so gifted that it's like anything else. Like, you know, if you had a great singing voice, you probably wouldn't be an NFL scout. You know what I mean? Like if you're giving, you know, if I was 6'8", I would have played basketball longer. I would have probably tried to really make a career out of it because I loved the sport. There are certain limitations. Like Ohio State has no limitations on the perimeter. They're probably the most gifted college football team in terms of talent on the perimeter. And I think it kind of diluted their power.
You know,
game.
one thing you brought up earlier, I would say last year is a good example, probably of the 12 weeks in college football. There are probably 4 or 5 throughout the year where there's a lot of games that just don't matter. And as long as you watch the one big game,
I know it.
You start looking at the schedule, like LSU, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, sprinkled throughout you get 2 or 3 marquee matchups, probably 80% of the weeks. So like you said, Saturday kind of becomes a little Sunday light. And we've talked about this before. That Sunday morning slate kind of stinks now.
It's not as good as it used to be.
Because they're all in on Amazon. They're all in on the primetime games. And obviously CBS and Fox, the afternoon games. You're getting a lot of Carolina, Atlantas, you know, in the Minnesota, Tennessee Titans in the morning. You're like, I'm not even going to talk about this game. Do I need to just have it on the background?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at our Fox schedule last week. There's a lot of Saints in that 1 o'clock window, and I can only do so much Derek Carr underneath. So and you're hoping for us at Fox and CBS, we're hoping that Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels pop because there's a lot of Chicago-Washington matchups first window. But I mean, you know, if you're Fox, you want to put Green Bay and San Francisco and Dallas and Philadelphia and the Rams, you want to put them late. So I think Fox will be fine because I think Chicago and Washington will be fascinating teams with these really high level athletic quarterbacks. But it was the first time I'd looked at an NFL schedule and I felt the NFL didn't protect Sunday. I thought it was the best Thursday schedule, star quarterbacks on Monday, the Sunday night game, like that early window. Not that they punted it, but they just don't care.
Do you remember
much.
when Peter Schrager was Mahomes' rookie year? Veach gave him a little tape and he put it out there, a little inside, like this is what's coming. Do you have any of that on Tom Brady's calls for Fox here in the spring that you've got your hands on that you can shed some light on?
Well, first of all, Greg Olson was so good. I think it actually plays into Brady's favor. Like he's really replacing somebody that was excellent. And so I think, in my career, when I've replaced somebody that's really good, Tony Kornheiser, you just work harder. You're like, Jesus, I'm replacing sort of an iconic Northeast guy. I think Brady would work hard regardless.
Never been a knock on
And the one
Tom.
thing, the one thing Fox does really well, like every network I've worked at, when I first got to ESPN, George Bodenheimer came from sales. ESPN's ability to monetize every part of that network was really a thing to behold. Then John Skipper comes in. He has a literary background. He creates ESPN. The magazine gets bigger, ESPN.com. I thought some of our journalism, the writing, Bill Simmons, that flourished. Eric Shanks, the sports president at Fox, he grew up in a truck. So the quality of production and announcing teams is really high at Fox, much better than ESPN, in my opinion, on average. They had to take Buck and Aikman to elevate theirs. So, the one thing about Fox is they don't miss a lot they don't miss on play-by-play guys and analyst guys. They just don't. I think it's what the network does better than everybody because our president, he started overseas in a truck and it matters like where you come from. George Bodenheimer, sales. Skipper I'll contend that Skipper didn't really like TV. He loved books. I thought the quality of writing and Grantland exploded. Fox is tremendous in terms of production. They took over golf, and golf is really hard because golf fans are purists. People that watch it love it. And they remember Joe Buck did it.
Yeah.
It was
Buck and
the
Greg
first
Norman.
year. Yeah, in the first year, it wasn't clunky. You could feel it wasn't theirs. It wasn't like CBS doing the Masters. By the second year, I was like, this is pretty good. They had everything mic'd. I was like, I was watching. I think it was in the Pacific Northwest.
It was
there was a tournament.
Bay,
I'm like,
because Joe Klatt was doing it, Shane Bacon. They had a good crew. I enjoyed it too.
I was like, they're giving me audio I've never heard. This is you have to be fair as a critic. It's pretty good. World Cup. I think our World Cup coverage is sensational. Now, I also think there's so many good soccer voices in Europe. So the bar is really high. But I tend to think is Brady will be really good because it's what Fox does. Our big game production, college football, NFL, World Cup, NASCAR, it's really good.
That's a good point because Joe Buckley's like, who do you got in the bullpen? Kevin Burkhardt and Joe Davis. Mariano Rivera come out of the bullpen. I'm excited to see Tom because I don't know if you saw Drew Brees got inducted in the Hall of Fame and he was complaining that he got a raw deal. And it's like, after I watched you, obviously no one disputes your knowledge of football and your playing career. But not everyone, like I always thought Phillip Rivers would have been remarkable on TV. He was made for it.
Yeah.
To me, Drew's much more made to be like John Lynch running a team. Like I don't think it suits him very well. Where Tom he can play the corporate guy like Peyton Manning, but you see him on the roast, like there's the reason he's the number one teammate in the history of the league. So I would imagine that first game, Cleveland, Dallas. What do you think? That's getting a 20% bump for the Tom Brady, just people interested in seeing what this is going to sound like. It's going to be a lot of eyeballs on that game.
Yeah. And I think Tom will be diligent and thorough, and that's what he is. I know this.
CBS had a talk with Romo about playing golf. Like that's not happening with Tom.
Like Brady's putting in a lot of hours. Like I don't keep track of it, but sometimes I will see somebody in the building. I'll say, well, what's that? And they're like, oh, Tom's in the building today. And I'm like, it's like the seventh time. So like, and our it's again, every network I've been at, like every manager I've had or GM or president, they all do something well. So he's getting world-class coaching. And he's, the thing about Tom is Tom has been, everything is big with Tom, like commercials. He can't do everything's Like when he's on with me, I had him on, I think a week ago. I asked my first question. He went like 4 minutes and it was fascinating. Like I had Chris Ballard, the Colts GM, called me 2 days later. He said, I was just listening to that. And he said, boy, hey, he's really good. He's like, Tom's really gave thoughtful answers on this stuff. So it's, and I had two other people that didn't call me, but reached out in the league and they were like, he's going to be fine. So I don't worry about it. I mean, I also think, and this is not a knock at critics because you do have to write a column after his first broadcast, right? If you're Andrew Marchand, you have to write a column, right? Like, or Brian Curtis at the Ringer. You're not going to not
There'll be
talk
25
about it.
pieces on
But
that on Monday.
Yeah. But I do think the people that I look at in that space who I respect, and I just named two of them, I think everything, I mean, I've been doing this for 33 years. I've worked with all sorts of different people on the air. I always felt, even doing 3 hours a day, it took me about 6 weeks to figure out your timing so that I can talk, you can come in, I can feed. It takes 6 weeks. Well, 6 weeks to me is 30, what is that, 30 shows? Think about that. Like Tom has got to be good first show. Like, here we go. So it to me, I thought, again, I thought Olsen was so good with Burkhardt. I always think Buck and Aikman's strength was they sound like on the flight home, they're taking the same private jet home, having a bourbon and telling jokes. Like Summerall and Madden. You're like, oh, these guys, they like each other. I thought Burkhardt and Olsen had that. And I think that'll be that chemistry thing. It's hard to develop. And it's you can like somebody. I remember when Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre got a show called High Noon at ESPN, and they were friends. And I remember calling somebody because I had watched clips of it. And I called somebody who knew both. And I said, do they like each other? And they're like, oh, they're great friends. And I'm like, it doesn't feel like it. So you can, and again, it's not a shot at either guy. Chemistry's hard.
In life, in relationships.
That's why,
I mean, you name it, business, every walk of life.
Yeah. And now put a camera on and go talk to 24 million people with a producer in your ear, a director, you're throwing to Aaron, a Rinaldi piece, pressure. I mean, I've said this before. The hardest thing to do in broadcasting is an analyst for college football because they play 80 guys.
Dual numbers.
Second is NFL.
Guys you never heard of.
But think about this. Tom he'll have to talk 200 times between 8 and 14 seconds. If he boots it once, that's all anybody's going to talk about.
I think it's cool that he just, and I know he got paid a lot of money, but because Peyton had the same opportunity and he basically said, like, I don't really want to travel. I just want to do it. We got one out of the two of them. And I think they both, they're just special personalities. Like, I don't remember this, but when Montana did it and was terrible, I mean, we've seen a lot of guys do it. Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, I would say they've been pretty successful at everything they put their mind to. And Peyton's a good example. Like, I used to watch that when the ESPN broadcast was terrible. And then they get Troy, and it's like, I just want to watch the normal broadcast. I don't watch it as much. But now they bring in Bill. But yeah, there's Tom's gonna have a lot of people talking about him. I don't promise you that much. I'm excited.
Yeah. John Middlekauff, 3 and out, former NFL scout.